Hi, my name is Elizabeth Warden. Here's this. And I'm doing my portfolio assignment for week 11 for the short and long reflexes of the enteric nervous system. So just an overview of the ENS. The enteric nervous system, or ENS, can uniquely carry out reflexes without the input of the central nervous system, which is unique because most systems are relying directly on the central nervous system, but the gut can communicate within itself. It has the option to, at least. The ENS in humans carries out many digestive functions such as motility, meaning the movement of the gut, secretion of nutrients in and out of the gut, and digestive tract growth. There are intrinsic neurons in the ENS that are completely contained within the gut that allow for gut-specific communication, and then there are extrinsic neurons that bring signals from the central nervous system to the digestive system that allow for intercommunication between the two. The ENS uses neurotransmitters and neuromodulators such as serotonin, vasoactive intestinal peptide, and nitric oxide. This is similar to the central nervous system in the sense that they both use neurotransmitters, not necessarily the same ones, but there is overlap, such as serotonin. There's a lot of similarities between the central nervous system and the enteric nervous system. This is one of them, and some structural components as well. It's extremely complex with its own integrating center. Many researchers thought that this could have been used to study the central nervous system, but the more that we found out about the gut and the gut microbiome and other things about how it interplays with the central nervous system, the more we've realized how complex it is and how difficult it is to understand in itself. So it's not a simple system that we can use as a model for the central nervous system. It's more of its own thing that is similar to the central nervous system in many ways, but it's not something that could shortcut the understanding of the brain. They're both pretty complex, the more we're finding out about both of them. So short reflexes are those which start and end within the GI tract. So its intercommunication system that I was speaking of earlier about it being unique to itself. The submucosal plexus receives sensory input from the gut lumen, so the inside of the lumen, inside the GI tract, the submucosal plexus, which is found within the submucosa, of course, receives the first sensory input, and it's made up of a lot of nerves and neurons. The ENS system interprets this input from the neurons in the submucosal plexus, and then it generates a response to these interpretations. And then in this way, the submucosal plexus controls secretion through the GI epithelial cells, the epithelial cells that are exposed to the lumen, that allows it to have more of its own control within, again, the ENS system itself with these short reflexes. The myenteric plexus controls motility within the gut as well. The myenteric plexus is also found within the submucosa, and it allows for gut movement, and it signals within the gut complex, again, in the short reflexes within the ENS system without any outside input. It signals movement in the gut and allows for movement of food and fluid within the gut. So long reflexes. Long reflexes are those that communicate with the central nervous system through autonomic neurons. So these are the inputs that are coming from either from the central nervous system or from the ENS system, and allow for intercommunication between the two. So feed-forward reflexes and emotional reflexes are those that which originate outside the gut tract and outside the digestive tract. They're called cephalic reflexes due to their origination in the brain and skull and head area. Those specifically, the feed-forward and emotional reflexes, are called cephalic just due to their placement in the body. Some examples of feed-forward reflexes include sensory inputs such as sight, smell, sound, or thoughts of food, which those induce physical responses such as salivation, stomach growling, like anything like that. So there's a lot of physical responses that happen in response to hunger cues and things in the brain that go on in the digestive system, including like acid production, things like that. Some examples of emotional reflexes include traveler's constipation, butterflies in the stomach, and psychologically induced nausea and vomiting. So these are emotional responses from the central nervous system in the brain that communicate to the gut that cause physical symptoms, like real physical symptoms. So this kind of stresses the importance of the brain-gut communication in digestive function. So real physical symptoms can originate from emotional responses like anxiety causing constipation, or depression causing like bad gut responses, which are recorded and researched continuously. And these like phenomena that people are pretty familiar with, like anxiety causing butterflies in the stomach, which is just kind of this elevated emotional feeling that happens within the stomach due to central nervous system feedback going to the gut. Most control over lung reflexes is through the vagus nerve, through the excitation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So when the parasympathetic system is active, that's where the rest and digest type of mentality comes into play. So when it's excited, when it is active, there is increased digestion. So digestion continues and goes further. Whereas with the sympathetic system, it inhibits digestion. So an excitation of the sympathetic nervous system would inhibit the digestive system. The vagus nerve is where these types of feedbacks from the central nervous system play into the digestive system. So here's just kind of a review of this idea of short and long reflexes. We can see in this figure that there can be outside input from cephalic neurons coming from the brain, such as sight and smell, going through sensory receptors, going through the brain, going to the ENS system, and then that can affect the ENS system. We can also see that within this like gray area, the little brain or the ENS system of its own can receive its own sensory feedback from itself. So there's sensory receptors and neurons, interneurons, and then it affects the ENS system. And just to review, the ENS can independently send and receive reflexes through the autonomic nervous system called short reflexes, but signals may originate from outside sources or originate within the GI tract to communicate within the central nervous system or from the central nervous system. So there's many implications to the extent to which the ENS contributes to signaling and functioning due to its complex nature. As we can see in this figure, it affects a lot of other systems in the body. So as the smooth muscles and exocrine cells are affected by the ENS system, there can be changes in a bunch of things that are signaling to the digestive system. So the release of bile and pancreatic secretions from the gallbladder and from the pancreas. As we look down, it can also affect GI peptides, which are then influencing the brain, the endocrine pancreas, which then affects insulin and glucagon being released into the blood, which affects the entire body. It can affect endocrine function, and hunger and satiety hormones are also affected by the GI peptides that are released from the secretory cells of the stomach and the small intestine. So these things trigger a cascade of effects throughout the whole body, including the central nervous system and the brain, but also other organs, accessory organs, and just other organs in general that involve both endocrine function, which affect the digestive system, but also like signaling pathways to the brain. So that is it. Here's the citation, but that's the overview of the small and long reflexes.